You know, when you're heading into any building project, from, say, a simple home renovation to a major commercial build, there's that feeling of needing to know the rules of engagement, right?
Oh, absolutely.
It's about understanding the core understanding between who's paying and who's actually doing the work.
Yeah, definitely. And that core understanding, those fundamental rules, well, they're laid out in what we call contract documents. Think of them as the operating manual, sort of.
An operating manual.
Oh,
Okay.
yeah. Not just for the physical building, but, for the entire relationship between the owner and the contractor.
Okay, let's unpack this then. For this deep dive, we're really zeroing in on what many consider the linchpin of that manual, the agreement.
Hmm.
We've spent some time in a chapter that really dissects this specific document, and our goal today is, well, to give you a real shortcut to grasping that essential legal bond between owners and contractors just by understanding the central piece.
Exactly. Because while a whole collection of documents eventually forms the complete contract package,
Mm.
the agreement itself is where the really crucial details about a particular project are formally established and agreed upon. It's the signed proof, you know?
The signed evidence of that mutual understanding.
Right.
Now, it's interesting because the documents flying around when contractors are bidding the bid documents, they kind of evolve into these contract documents once a contractor gets the job, right?
That's right, they do.
But not everything from the bidding phase makes it into the final legally binding contract. So today, we're really drilling down on what officially becomes that contract, with the agreement being our main focus.
Yeah, that's a critical distinction. The bid documents, they serve their purpose in getting to the point of awarding the contract. But once that happens, it's the specific relevant documents from that initial set that become the actual contract documents. They establish the legal framework for the whole project.
So let's get straight to it. What exactly are these contract documents we keep mentioning?
Well, uh, at their heart, they form the legal foundation, the basis of the deal between the owner, the one commissioning the work, and the contractor, the one performing it. They essentially create a comprehensive picture of the project, in black and white.
So it's definitely more than just the architectural drawings.
Oh, precisely.
Yeah.
While the drawings are obviously essential for showing the what of the project visually, the contract documents as a whole provide a really detailed written description of the project. They clearly define the specific rights and responsibilities of both the owner and the contractor.
Okay.
And they establish the terms and conditions, basically the rules governing how the project will be managed from start to finish.
And what happens if someone doesn't follow these rules? If they don't stick to the terms?
Well, that's where things can get tricky, right? If either the owner or the contractor fails to uphold their end of the bargain, the terms outlined in these documents, well, the other party has grounds to potentially terminate the contract.
Terminate, wow.
Yeah. And yes, that can absolutely lead to legal action.
For both sides.
Whether it's between an owner and a general contractor, or even, between a general contractor and their subcontractors, everyone needs to adhere to what was agreed upon.
It sounds like a pretty crucial set of documents then. Where do these things typically originate? Who puts them together?
They usually come about quite early in the project life cycle, typically during the design phase. Often you'll have architects taking the lead,
Okay.
and they'll bring in their team of experts, structural engineers for stability, electrical engineers for power and lighting, maybe even specifications consultants who specialize in like material standards and quality.
Gotcha.
It's also important to know that there are standardized forms available for many of these documents, especially the core agreement and the general conditions. Organizations like the American Institute of Architects, the AIA, provide these.
Standardized forms, that sounds like it could simplify things quite a bit. But what about different sizes of projects? Does a small kitchen reno get the same mountain of paperwork as, say, a skyscraper?
That's a great point. No, not necessarily. On very large and intricate projects, all these documents, well, except for the actual drawings themselves, are often compiled into what's called a project manual.
A project manual?
Yeah, think of it as the complete reference guide for the project. However, on smaller jobs, you might find some of the details simply added as notes directly onto the drawings. So the format might vary,
Okay.
but the fundamental principle remains the same. These documents, regardless of how they're presented, clearly define the obligations of everyone involved.
Okay, so we have this whole package of contract documents, but you mentioned earlier that the agreement is really the cornerstone. Why is that specific document so central?
That's right. While you might have drawings showing exactly what needs to be built and specifications detailing the materials,
Mhm.
the agreement holds that central position because it's the signed confirmation. It shows both the owner and the contractor are aligned on the most critical aspects of this specific project. And crucially, in the event of any inconsistencies or, conflicts between different contract documents, the terms explicitly stated in the agreement typically take precedence. They usually win out.
Ah, okay. So even if the general conditions have one clause, but the agreement has a different specific statement about, say, payment schedules, the agreement's wording will usually govern.
Exactly. That's
Okay.
generally how it works. It's the document that legally binds the signing parties, the owner and the contractor, to this particular undertaking.
Uh-huh.
And while people often casually call it the contract,
Yeah, I do that all the time.
right, well, technically, the agreement is one vital part of the larger set of contract documents, and it actually incorporates the others by referencing them.
So its main job is to lay out the essential facts about this specific construction project.
Precisely. It's where the who, what, where, when, and crucially, the how much of the project starts to become really legally binding.
All right, so what are the absolute must-have pieces of information, the things you'll find in pretty much every single agreement?
Okay, there are several key elements.
Right.
First and foremost, you'll always find the legal names, official addresses, and most importantly, the signatures of both the contractor and the owner.
Signatures, yeah.
These clearly identify the parties entering into the contract, and those signatures act as the ultimate sign-off. They signify acceptance of all the responsibilities outlined, not just in the agreement itself, but also in all the other documents it points to.
Makes perfect sense. You need to know exactly who you're dealing with, legally speaking. What else is essential?
Well, a really critical part is the detailed list of referenced documents. The agreement will specifically name which drawings, which specifications, and any other supporting documents, maybe soils tests, environmental reports, whatever, are officially part of the contract.
Okay.
It might include language like, the work will be performed according to the architectural plans dated May 25, 2017, specifications prepared by Spec Writers, Inc., dated April 12, 2017, and the soils test data from Soil Testing Associates, dated February 19, 2017, something like that.
So it's super specific.
Exactly. It leaves no room for doubt about what exactly everyone is agreeing to build and, to what standards.
So no arguing later about which version of the blueprints we're actually supposed to be following.
That's the idea. Clarity at this stage is paramount for preventing disputes down the road. Another essential component is the precise address of the project and a concise but clear description of the work to be performed.
Location and scope.
Right. You need to know without question where the product is located and a brief summary of what the contractor is contracted to do there. For instance, it might state, the contractor shall furnish all labor, materials, and equipment necessary to complete the construction of a single-family residence located at 200 Main Street, Haverford, PA. Clear and simple.
Okay, specific location, general overview of the work. What about the money side of things, the financials?
Absolutely crucial. Yep. The agreement will clearly detail the payment terms and the total contract sum, which is often the agreed-upon bid amount, right?
Usually, yeah.
It will explain exactly how much the contractor will be compensated for successfully completing the described work and what the schedule for those payments will look like.
Yeah.
For example, you might see language like, the owner shall pay the contractor a fixed sum of $225,500,
Okay.
payable in monthly installments based upon the percentage of work completed in the preceding month as certified by the owner's representative, or something similar.
So it spells out the total cost and the process for the contractor to actually get paid as the project moves along.
Precisely. And finally, the agreement typically specifies the time allowed for completion.
Ah, the timeline.
The timeline, yes. This is often stated as a total number of calendar days or maybe working days permitted to finish the work. It might even include a specific date for commencement, when they have to start.
Right.
An example could be, the work to be performed by the contractor shall commence no later than 5 days following the receipt of the building permit and shall be substantially completed within 185 calendar days thereafter. Something like that. And this is significant because failing to meet this agreed-upon time frame can sometimes trigger what are known as liquidated damages.
Liquidated damage penalties, basically.
Essentially, yeah. Pre-calculated amounts of money the contractor might owe the owner for each day of delay. And if no specific time frame is mentioned, well, the legal default is usually that the work must be completed within a reasonable time.
Sounds vague.
It can be. Yeah, reasonable can definitely be open to interpretation and potential disagreement later on.
That all makes sense. Now, I noticed something in our source material about exclusions. What's the purpose of putting those in an agreement?
Right. Exclusions. They're essentially specific items or responsibilities that the contractor is explicitly stating they are not taking on as part of the agreed-upon work. Think of it as drawing lines in the sand, defining the limits of their contractual obligations.
Can you give me some examples? Like what kind of things might be excluded?
Certainly. An agreement might state something like the cost of obtaining necessary permits, conducting required soil tests, and any associated disposal fees are not included in the contract sum
Okay.
and shall be the responsibility of the owner. This makes it clear the owner handles and pays for those specific things. Or maybe there's an existing feature on the property, like a prized tree.
Oh, yeah. Happens all the time.
Right. A contractor might include an exclusion stating, the contractor shall take all reasonable precautions to avoid damage to the existing mature oak tree, but assumes no responsibility for its health or survival during or after construction.
So it's really about clearly defining the boundaries of what the contractor is and isn't responsible for.
Exactly. And it can extend to other potential unknowns, too. For instance, a contractor might exclude responsibility for dealing with unexpected hazardous materials found underground,
Oh,
which
yeah.
could massively inflate costs. Or maybe exclude major unforeseen spikes in the price of essential building materials that are totally beyond their control.
It sounds like a strategic way for contractors to manage potential risks then. Keeps them from having to guess about every possible problem.
Precisely. By clearly outlining what they are not responsible for, contractors can potentially avoid having to, inflate their initial bids just to cover every single conceivable contingency. It's a risk management tool for them.
And for owners, it clarifies where their responsibilities lie too.
Absolutely. Understanding these exclusions can be a key point in negotiation for owners to clarify responsibilities right up front.
Now, we've mostly been talking about agreements between property owners and the main or general contractors. What about when the GC hires subcontractors for specific parts of the work, like plumbing or electrical? Are those agreements structured similarly?
Yes, the fundamental principles are pretty much the same. Agreements between general contractors and their subcontractors contain very similar essential information. You'll find a detailed description of the specific scope of work the sub will perform, the location, the legal names and addresses of both the GC and the sub, a clear list of the relevant documents they need to follow, often referencing parts of the main contract.
Right, the prime contract.
Exactly. Plus the related drawings and specs. Then there's a defined time frame for the sub to complete their portion, and of course the agreed-upon payment terms for the sub.
Makes sense.
And just like the primary agreement, these subcontractor agreements must also meet the basic legal requirements for a valid contract. Mutual agreement, consideration, something of value exchange, legal capacity of both parties, and, the purpose has to be lawful.
Okay, so the core elements are pretty consistent all the way down the contracting chain. Now, our source material mentioned different forms of agreements. What exactly does that refer to? Are there different types?
Yeah, it simply refers to the various standardized ways these agreements can be written and presented. There isn't one single legally mandated format everyone has to use. Some property owners, especially larger companies with their own lawyers, might draft their own custom agreements, tailored exactly to their needs and how much risk they want to take on.
Right.
Others might just grab generic off-the-shelf templates they find somewhere. And then, as we touched on earlier, you have the widely recognized standardized forms published by professional organizations like the AIA, Consensus Docs, and the EJCDC. Those are used extensively across the industry.
So who typically gets to decide which form of agreement gets used for a particular project? Does the owner usually call the shots?
It often depends, really. It depends on the scale and complexity of the project and the relationship between the parties. On smaller privately funded projects, you might find the contractor providing their standard agreement.
Okay.
But on larger projects, especially public ones, the owner usually dictates the specific contract form that will be used. The choice can also be heavily influenced by the project delivery method chosen, like design bid build versus design build.
Right, how the project is set up.
Exactly. And the payment structure agreed upon, whether it's a fixed lump sum, cost plus fee, or something else.
Interesting. What about these letter agreements our source mentioned? That sounds pretty informal.
They are, relatively speaking, yeah. Letter agreements represent a more simplified, streamlined form of contract, often used for smaller scale, less complex projects where the scope of work is pretty straightforward.
Okay.
They are essentially contracts formed through a written exchange of letters between the owner and the contractor, just outlining the key terms.
Can you walk me through a quick example of how that might work, like for a really simple job?
Sure. Imagine a homeowner, let's call him Mr. Owner, wants to hire ABC Construction to, say, build a small trellis and repair a bit of fence.
Okay.
Mr. Owner calls ABC, they talk about the work.
Okay.
ABC then sends Mr. Owner a letter. It describes the trellis build, the fence repair details, maybe specifies materials, and states the total price. It might also say ABC will provide a cost proposal later for just the fence repair part.
So it's all in the letter.
Right. If Mr. Owner is happy with the terms and the price in that letter, he just signs a copy and sends it back to ABC Construction.
And that's it. Contract formed.
Boom. Once ABC gets that signed letter back, they've effectively created a binding letter agreement. A contract is officially in place.
So even though it's just a simple letter, it still absolutely needs to contain those essential elements we discussed earlier to actually be a valid contract.
Right, absolutely, yes. Even in its simplicity, a letter agreement must clearly identify the parties involved, names, addresses, provide a clear description and address of the project or work, state the agreed-upon price, specify a timeline if applicable, and crucially, include signatures from both sides.
Got to have the signatures.
Got to have the signatures to show that mutual agreement. Without those core elements in both signatures, it might not hold up legally. And while letter agreements are efficient for simple stuff, larger, more complex projects really need more comprehensive agreements to cover all the potential issues.
Okay, that's a good distinction. Now let's dig a bit deeper into these standardized form agreements. You mentioned the big three: AIA, consensus docs, and EJCDC. What makes them so popular in the construction world?
Well, these organizations put a ton of resources into developing and publishing these pre-written contract forms, including the core agreement document. They've been meticulously crafted and refined over many, many years.
Okay.
They get input from all sorts of industry professionals, legal experts. The basic idea is they provide a really robust and legally sound starting point that you can then adapt for your specific project.
And the AIA, the American Institute of Architects, they've been doing this for a very long time, haven't they? Like over a century.
That's correct. Yeah, the AIA started publishing standard contract documents way back in the late 19th century. Because their forms have been used so much for so long, they've been tested in court countless times.
Ah, so there's legal history there.
Exactly. There's a substantial body of legal precedent associated with their specific wording. And that history really contributes to why they're so widely accepted. Plus, the AIA regularly updates its whole suite of documents to keep up with changes in construction practices, new tech, laws, regulations.
I see. And they have different sets of documents depending on how the project is actually structured, right? Like different delivery methods.
Exactly. They offer different families of documents designed for various project delivery methods. The traditional design, bid, build, design, build, where one entity does both. Construction management, even newer things like integrated project delivery.
Okay.
And they also have standard forms for all the related stuff. Contract administration, project management, change orders, payment applications. Basically, a whole system. For smaller projects with simple payment setups like lump sum or cost plus, a common one is the AIA document A104-2017. It's like an all-in-one agreement with general conditions built in.
What about consensus docs? You mentioned they came along later as an alternative. What's their angle? What makes them different?
Yeah, consensus docs was introduced back in 2007. It was a big collaboration. Over 40 different industry associations got together. Owners, GCs, subs, diviners, everyone.
Wow, broad group.
Yeah. Their main goal was to create contracts that, in their view, allocated risks more fairly among everyone involved and to really emphasize the direct owner-contractor relationship. One key difference compared to AIA docs is that consensus docs deliberately removes the design professional, usually the architect, from being formally involved in settling disputes between the owner and contractor.
Interesting. So it changes the dynamic a bit if there's a fight.
Precisely, yeah.
Yeah.
Consensus docs offers various series too, covering general contracting, collaborative methods, design build, CM at risk, subcontracting, program management, you name it. And just like AIA, they keep their forms updated for things like BIM and green building.
And then there's the EJCDC, the Engineers Joint Contract Documents Committee. When do people typically reach for their forms?
EJCDC forms are often the go-to when the lead designer on the project is an engineer. Think big infrastructure projects, roads, bridges, utility plants like water treatment facilities.
Ah. engineering-heavy projects.
Exactly. The EJCDC is a joint effort by several major engineering groups. They've been developing standard contracts since the 70s, really focusing on the specific needs of engineering design and construction.
So a different professional focus compared to the AIA, which is more architect-centric.
That's a good way to put it, yeah. Their documents are tailored for engineered construction, engineer-led design build, agreements just for engineering services themselves, procurement, even public-private partnerships, P3s. And like the others, they update regularly too.
It really sounds like each of these organizations brings a slightly different perspective to the table, doesn't it? Different priorities, maybe.
That's a very insightful way to look at it. Yes. For instance, both AIA and EJCDC see the design professional architect or engineer as having a pretty significant role representing the owner during construction, doing inspections, certifying payments, etc. But, as we said, Consensus Docs takes a different approach to the designer's role in formal dispute resolution between the owner and contractor. Understanding these nuances, even subtle ones, is really important when you're deciding which standard form might be the best fit for a specific project and what the parties actually prioritize.
But ultimately, even these super detailed standard forms, they're really just a starting point, aren't they? You can still negotiate and tweak them.
Oh, absolutely, yes. They provide a well-established, legally vetted foundation, but the parties signing the agreement always have the option to negotiate. They can modify specific terms and conditions to better fit the unique situation of their project.
How do they do that? Add things.
Yeah, typically by adding supplemental conditions or making specific amendments or riders to the pre-printed language. It's quite common.
So boiling it down, what are the main advantages of using these standardized forms in the first place? Why not just write one from scratch every time?
Well, there's several big benefits. First, they save a huge amount of time and legal effort compared to drafting from zero. Second, users can generally feel pretty confident that these forms are reasonably complete and accurate, covering most of the crucial legal and practical bases.
Okay.
And third, particularly with the AIA forms, that long history of use means they've been tested in court so many times that gives you a certain level of legal predictability.
Yeah,
But,
there's always a but.
right, it's important to remember that even these well-established standard forms aren't perfect. They can still have ambiguities or issues that pop up in specific situations. No form is totally bulletproof.
That's a really good point to keep in mind. Now, we spent a lot of time talking about written agreements. What about those really small, seemingly simple projects, where someone might just shake hands on it, a verbal agreement? Is that ever okay?
Relying solely on verbal agreements for construction work, even for what seems like a really simple job, can be, well, pretty risky.
Risky how?
It might feel easier upfront, save some paperwork time, right? But memories fade. Circumstances change unexpectedly. Misunderstandings can easily creep in as the project goes on. And when disputes happen, and they often do, resolving them really hinges on having clearly defined terms, which is hard without writing.
So, legally speaking, is a verbal agreement even binding? Is it a real contract?
That's actually a bit complex,
Yeah.
legally. Generally speaking, in many places, a contract doesn't strictly have to be in writing to be legally valid.
Oh, really?
However, and this is a big however, there's a critical difference between a contract being technically valid and being readily enforceable in court.
Ah, enforceability.
Exactly. Certain types of contracts, often defined by laws like the statute of frauds, must be in writing to be legally enforceable. And even if a verbal contract is considered valid under the law, proving the specific terms of that agreement if there's a dispute, that can be incredibly difficult if there's no written record. No clear scope, no payment terms documented, no timeline, maybe no witnesses.
So it might technically be a contract, but good luck getting a court to actually make someone stick to it if things go south.
That's pretty much it. Imagine a homeowner verbally agrees to pay a contractor, say, $1,000 to paint their living room. Before the work starts, the homeowner changes their mind, denies they ever agreed. The contractor would have a really tough time proving that verbal contract existed and what its terms were without any written proof.
Yeah, I can see that.
And it works the other way, too. The contractor finishes the painting, just like they verbally discussed, but the homeowner refuses to pay the full $1,000. Maybe they claim the price was lower or the work wasn't good enough. Without writing, it just becomes a he said, she said mess. Makes it very hard for a court to figure out what was actually agreed upon, and the contractor might really struggle to get paid fairly.
So beyond just enforceability, writing it down just avoids confusion.
Exactly. It just minimizes misunderstandings, ensures everyone has a clear shared understanding of what they're supposed to do and what they can expect from the very beginning.
So, the best practice is almost always to get the agreement down in writing, even for those smaller, seemingly simple jobs.
That is generally the most prudent, safest approach, yes. And it's also important for you to know that the specific laws about when a contract absolutely must be in writing can vary quite a bit from state to state or jurisdiction to jurisdiction.
Oh, how so?
Well, these laws might depend on the type of project, like residential versus commercial, its total dollar value, or even how long the project is expected to take. For instance, in many places, contracts that literally cannot be fully performed within 1 year of being made often have to be written to be enforceable.
The year, okay.
And some states have very specific rules mandating written contracts for certain types of work, like home improvement projects, sometimes regardless of the cost.
So, wrapping this up then, the fundamental takeaway here seems to be that while it might sometimes feel like, I don't know, unnecessary paperwork or hassle, having a clearly written agreement, and particularly that core agreement document we focused on, is really about establishing clarity. It's about defining expectations and providing crucial legal protection for everyone involved, whether you're the owner paying for the work or the contractor doing it.
Precisely. Couldn't have said it better. The agreement lays that essential groundwork. It clearly outlines the fundamental facts, the core legal obligations, and ultimately that paves the way for a more transparent, more predictable, and hopefully much less contentious project experience for everybody.
So if you, are a listener, find yourself involved in any kind of construction project down the line, big or small, really getting a handle on the power and the importance of this foundational agreement document can truly empower you. It helps you approach the whole process with more confidence and a much clearer picture of your rights and responsibilities.
Absolutely. And maybe it prompts a final thought for you to chew on. Given all the complexities we've touched on and the potential for disagreements that can pop up even in what seem like simple projects, how might a really thorough understanding of the agreement empower you to navigate the world of construction with, say, greater assurance and a much sharper perspective on your legal standing and your obligations?